Hi everyone, today we're going to be talking about variables and data types in Java. First, what is a variable? Now, let's say you're trying to model a student but with Java code or in a Java program. There's some basic information you're going to want to store about each student, like what's their name or their age or their student ID. That's where variables come in. Variables are an allotted space in memory where that information is stored, so they can get very useful in your programs. Now in Java, there's some basic data types that you'll need to know because when you're creating a variable, you also have to specify what type of data is being stored in that variable. But before we talk about that, let's talk about units for storage because that gets important. I'm sure we've all heard of megabyte or gigabyte. These are large units of storage. But the basic unit is a byte, and bytes are made up of 8 bits. This gets important because now when we're talking about these 8 basic data types in Java, it's important to know how much space does each data type take up. Because when you declare your variable and you say, all right, I'm creating a Boolean variable, that tells the program that, all right, you need to allot 1 bit of space, or for an int, 32 bits of space in the memory for that value to be stored. All right, so let's talk about these 8 data types. These are our most commonly used ones, okay? Boolean stores a true or false value. And this is like, let's say I want to know if my student is graduating this year. Then we can store that in a Boolean value of either true or false. Alright, next is the int. And here you can store numbers. So like you could store the student's age or their student ID in an int variable. And it stores numbers from this value to this value. Now we don't have to memorize what it is, but what's important to know is it does have a limit because it only takes up 32 bits of storage. So the numbers can only be that high. Next we've got double, and double is where you store decimal values. So like for int, you could only store whole number values. But let's say you want to know the student's GPA, then for that you would declare a double variable. And then finally there's char, and this stores individual characters. And it stores this thing of a Unicode value. If you want, you can search up more about it. But what's important to us is that it stores a single character, like letters, or even like characters like the special characters at the top. Now these are all data types that also store numbers. These 3 store whole numbers, and float is also another way to store a decimal value. Now let's say you have a really big number you want to store. Then in that case you would use long. Okay, but let's say you know your numbers are going to be in a smaller range and you want to be conscious of the amount of storage you're taking, then you can take short or byte. But for us, we're not super concerned about storage space, so we'll be mainly using int. And then float also can store decimal values, but as you can see, it takes up less space than the double. So in order to have the most accuracy, you'll want to use a double, because a double can actually store up to 15 digits after the decimal point. So it'll be a lot more precise when you're doing any calculations or things like that. Now, an additional data type that's very commonly used is a string, and we actually caught a glimpse of it in our Hello World program. Now, what we see here is basically whatever is within this double quotes, that right there is an example of a string. Now, strings are a little bit different from the previous 8 data types that we just talked about, so we're going to be diving a whole lot deeper into them in the future, but for now they're pretty important because let's say you want to know like what the student's name is, then you would use a string to store that information. And so here you can see like I created another string here and it prints it out. So we'll be talking more about strings in the future, but for now all you need to know is that it's double quotes and you can store like a phrase in there or anything like that. Cool. See you guys in the next video.